Well, everyone, welcome back to another episode of The Political Life. Today, I am very happy to bring on a prior guest, bring him on for a second time. Tom Manatos came on the show very early on to talk about his, he has the Tom Manatos Jobs, a service where you can go and find what jobs are available on Capitol Hill. And he was an incredibly popular guest at the time. And at the time, he has, if I remember correctly, he had worked for Speaker Pelosi, and then at the time was at Spotify. He has now moved on to head of federal affairs for Block. He has had some great jobs, and all along the while has kept the Tom Manatos Jobs site business going. And it is really the go-to place if you want to find out what jobs are available on Capitol Hill. And Tom, I'm so glad to have you back on. Welcome.
Thanks for having me again. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and you've been a busy man, so we appreciate you carving out some time to come on. I know you have some things you're working on end of the year, but before we get to the jobs on Capitol Hill, which is why I had you back on, last time we spoke, you were at Spotify. You have now made the move to Block. Just tell us a little bit about your responsibilities there.
Sure. Well, thanks again for having me. Yeah, I was blessed to be at Spotify through a very exciting time for those 6 years. But a friend let me know about an opportunity to join Block. And Block is formerly known as Square. And Block's companies include Square, Cash App, TBD, the music streaming service, Tidal, and then another crypto-related product called Square Spiral. But what we do on the federal affairs team is we represent Block and all of its companies to the federal government, whether it be Capitol Hill or the regulator. So really exciting space to be in, whether it's financial services, it's P2P, peer-to-peer payments, it's small businesses and transacting in new and in innovative ways, like whether it's buy now, pay later, like our product in Afterpay. And a lot of the crypto stuff we're doing. So it's a very exciting place to be, a new part of industry for me to deal with and a new business to learn. So it's cool, a cool place. I'm very lucky to be here.
Well, yeah, you are very lucky, and but obviously well-deserved. And you've worked for two great companies, and just says a lot about you. I can't imagine the responsibilities of being head of federal affairs for a company like Block. You must be quite the busy person these days.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bipartisan interest in the space, which is cool. You have a lot of folks that want to now regulate a ever-growing space in digital assets. You have new trade associations starting. You have new incoming chairs of committees that want to draw up the rules of the road for a new industry. And it's a really cool, exciting place to be and to help Congress do that and interact with business and to try to protect consumers, yet, allow people to innovate and grow is a really neat place to be. I was lucky enough to be at a somewhat similar space back in my first job off of Capitol Hill when I was lucky enough to start at the Internet Association when they were just starting. And so it's, I was part of the team that onboarded the first lobbyist for Twitter and the first federal lobbyist for Lyft and, saw these new internet companies come online in DC. And while the internet really wasn't regulated at any point, still to this day, it was still interesting to introduce them into how the parts of DC worked. And while Square has been around for a while and the team here at Block, the fact that the crypto industry is now interacting for the first time with DCM at a part of that beginning spot is a fascinating place, an interesting place to be.
So it's interesting, the Internet Association and other associations like that was probably a great place to start to kind of get a window onto the internet world and the possibilities for working in that industry.
That's right. And trade associations in general, I think, are a great place for someone coming out of government, whether that's the state or federal level. When you're a public servant, you might specify or be an expert in a certain issue area, or even if you're not. In my case, I was not. I was very much a generalist based off my service on Capitol Hill, and I needed to become that specialist. So I I was targeting two different industries. I was lucky enough to get the Internet Association. And when you're at a trade association, you're representing the industry to that federal agency or that federal government or the state level. And you're not only representing the entire industry, you're also getting to know the member companies. And so at the Internet Association, I got to know the top lobbyists at Facebook and Google and Uber and Pandora, so that when the opportunity came to go to Spotify, I was able to say, hey guys, I've represented all your issues for all these other, your competitors, in fact, the people you want to be like one day, when at the time Spotify was very small, and I know how to interact with the government. And so that was a really cool first step. And oftentimes when people don't know what they want to do coming out of government, I often tell them, look at least some trade associations you want to work for, so that you can, one, understand the industry's issues and the business models, but then also kind of figure out which company you want to go work for, and hopefully get to know those folks because you're representing them at that trade association.
Yeah, that's great advice. Great advice. And were you working for Speaker Pelosi prior to the Internet Association?
Yeah, prior to it, yes, but in between, I left Speaker Pelosi's office, went to the DNC to work for then Chair Debbie Wasserman Schultz as the President Obama was running for re-election. And I was lucky enough to do the convention and all that. And then at the very end, hopped to the Obama re-elect, and then did the Obama inauguration, the second inauguration. I was part of that team. So it was fun. But then, things happened, and, they had a slight hiring freeze. And it was then called sequestration, which is now more of a permanent thing, but it's temporary then. So I couldn't get the job in the administration of the White House like I wanted to. So that's when I pivoted to go to the Internet Association, which I was really lucky to join.
The inauguration must have been a blast to work on.
Oh yeah, I was lucky enough. A friend back from the Gore campaign actually hired me to be a part of her team. We're dealing with all the VIPs that were not elected officials. So while my entire career I've been dealing with elected officials, whether it was members of Congress on behalf of the speaker or the elected DNC folks of the DNC or governors and mayors, this was all the VIPs who were not elected officials. So it was a much different crowd, but same needs for the entire inaugural, which was a lot of fun. Part of history.
You must be sad to see Speaker Pelosi no longer speaker and announcing her retirement at some point. Oh yeah, definitely. It's a end of an era. So I was so blessed to be at the feet of history for her first leadership office. I actually joined her when she was the minority whip, got to see her and help start the leader's office, then help start the first woman speaker's office, and then back to the minority. But I was lucky enough to fall in love and marry someone of the opposite political party as President Bush's White House. And I saw a lot of her friends as President Bush was leaving office kind of deal with that. And I've taken some of those lessons learned and helping some of my former Pelosi colleagues and part of Team Pelosi kind of transition to the next steps. It's difficult when a principal you've worked for a long time. And same with some of my friends in the Obama administration. When things wind down, it can be very difficult. So I'm upset that we're losing her as a government, I'm biased, but I think he's the greatest speaker of all time. But yeah, I think she's done an incredible job and has handed over the leadership of her House Democratic Caucus to a very capable set of leaders. Now, when you talk about helping people leaving the administration, you were talking about your wife helping people leaving the Bush White House? Yeah, she and I, so at the time when we met, I was obviously just doing this for the Democrats on Capitol Hill and sending out the job announcements. But when I left the Hill to go to the DNC, she and I invested some of our own money to build a website that was purely nonpartisan, like literally getting every job we could get out there. And this was before Bush had left office. This is when, I'm sorry, no, it was after that. But I'd gone through that experience, and she's like, you got to make this bipartisan, you got to make it nonpartisan. So whether it's, and you've been mentioning a lot of Capitol Hill. So yes, we lead with the Capitol Hill jobs, but we put any nonprofit, trade association, private sector, campaign, state government, local government, any job in the policy, politics, or government space, we put it on our website every day. And at 9:15 every morning, an email comes out, a free daily email that you can subscribe to that basically puts every job or internship that we post in the last 24 hours out there. So for folks to follow and see. And then if they want the full job description, then they can click on the link and pay the small $5 a month fee to get the full job posting so they can apply or share it with friends. So that's the idea, is that a very small part of getting a job in politics and in policy and in government is knowing about it. And that's what we're trying to solve for. And so getting that job announcement in your inbox every morning from us is part of it.
but really the other 70 or so percent is networking related to those jobs. And that's what we also try to do with, we have a ton of online videos on the resources tab on our website, where this will be included just in kind of any talk that we've been given, or we actually just convened a panel and post-election panel. We just do it every 2 years, and like a time of transition of like a lot of folks have lost, a lot of folks have won, people are retiring, and with that the natural churn of the election cycle, like what does the landscape look like? So we've got a lot of those resources, but I really learned helping my wife's friends and my friends exit the Bush administration. And then I've now done that a couple of times with those friends of the Obama White House, friends of the Trump administration, and all leaving and trying to figure out what's next. And then multitudes of friends over the years, leaving Capitol Hill or transitioning after an election. So yeah, it's again, we're at that time of transition, and having a lot of conversations with folks, all different kinds of situations, and trying to figure out what's next for them.
Yeah, and I'm glad you corrected me, because it's really all jobs really in DC, I guess is what you can say, somehow connected to government in some way. That's right. I'm glad you corrected me. And it really is and for the listeners out there who have not checked it out, you really need to go check it out, tommanatosjobs.com. And he has, I don't think this is a trade secret, over 20,000 subscribers to his website, to his email service. Even if you are, it's a great way to track who's doing what and what's going on and who's looking. And the reason we're having Tom back on is obviously, every 2 years there's a lot of turnover. And with the House changing, going from Democrat to Republican control, there's going to be a lot of turnover. Now, you're going to have a lot of campaign people coming in. We all know that. But there's going to be a lot of churn and a lot of turnover and a lot of jobs available. And I just think, and I'm saying this because he's a guest, but I think it is a great place, one of the great places to start to kind of see what is out there and what's available. It's really a great service. And I have had recommended the site to people, and I've had people use it and really get a lot out of it. So. But it's fascinating to me. I love the fact we have the reason I asked about and I'm sorry, your wife's first name?
Dana.
I love the fact, the way that you and Dana approached it as you said, like bipartisan, nonpartisan way. It's just, here's the jobs in DC that are available right now. I love the fact that you can kind of track it, what's going on without subscribing. And then if you want to engage more, you simply start subscribing at that point. It's really a great window as to what's going on, I think, in Washington, D.C.
Well, yeah, if you were just simply a subscriber and the last year and a half, you've seen more crypto-related postings because that industry needed to hire in DC. You see now in the more recent months, you've seen a natural churn in Capitol Hill where you have people leaving for new members of Congress, people going to the administration for the first time. And so you can track certain trends within DC, within industry, at least the industry that services the federal government and some state governments, and then those hiring trends, which is fascinating. And as someone who is in politics and government, it's a very pay it forward world where there's always been someone who's helped me or you or anyone, even the chief of staff at the White House or the chief of staff in Mitch McConnell's office. They were an intern at one time, or someone to look to get that first internship or their first job. And someone had coffee with them, someone shared a posting with them. And then that is just in the DNA of this world. So even if I'm not actively looking for a job, I'm probably subscribed to my email because I'm going to see an internship posting for that kid that I just talked to at the coffee shop who went to my alma mater, or, that young woman who is a staff assistant, in the office that I visit often as when I'm lobbying that I want to help get her next job. And I send a posting that I see and say, hey, I know the chief of staff here or the LD here. I can help you. So that's why I think it's part of the popularity is that, sure, each individual is looking to get their next job, but also they're looking out for other people, which is fun.
Yeah, and it really is a bellwether. As you just said, I hadn't even thought of the crypto world. But yeah, it's really a bellwether of what's going on and what's to come.
Yep. Yeah. Even if it's like there's a certain scrutiny on a certain industry. There were a couple in the financial services world, non-crypto, ex-crypto recently that you've seen pop, those job postings pop. And a couple of the news-oriented newsletters have noticed. So it is funny to watch those trends happen.
What changes have you seen over the years?
I'd say based off the long-awaited and should have happened a long time ago, pay hikes on Capitol Hill have greatly affected what kind of jobs people are looking for downtown and in the private sector. So for ages, people were underpaid, and they're still underpaid on Capitol Hill. But now a chief of staff or senior staffer can actually make more than a member of Congress based off the pay hikes that have happened in the House. And so some of those trends in terms of the private sector hiring, it might not be as large of a bump or a bump at all, depending on what that person's going for in pay. Now, in the private sector, you have equity and a lot of other intangibles that are much more attractive than a government service. But that is one interesting thing. A couple of the other things are, I think, based off the high partisanship and the ever increasing partisanship on Capitol Hill, the things that only get done are one, when one party fully controls the government and you're able to turn those screws and get things done like the Democrats just did, even though there's small majorities in the last Congress, this current Congress, but soon to be last Congress. But then more importantly and more emphasis is the bipartisan relationship. So based off the frequent divided government that we've had, the private sector is really looking for somebody who can work on both sides of the aisle. And sure, on Capitol Hill, it's all about being partisan and tweets and the pettiness of the hyper partisan these days. But the hiring and the value of someone who they're looking for in the private sector who has that government service is someone who can reach across the aisle, has relationships across the aisle, knows how to work with other people, cross industry, cross party. And I think that's increasingly value. And it's also just like people are not afraid of hard work. I don't want to sound like an old man, but it's, some of the younger generations are placing more of a value on different aspects of jobs, which is culture is important. Treating your employees is very important. All those are important. But some of the complaints I hear from hiring managers, both on Capitol Hill and in the private sector, is just some folks aren't as hard at working, and that's a value that they're placing on folks more recently.
Well, it's interesting what you said about the bipartisanship. That gives us a little hope for the future. That they're looking for those skills and not the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
And I would imagine that a lot of it is automated. Have you had to get a fair amount of help or other help to keep it going every day?
No, it's a one-man show. I'm still approving job announcements. We've automated some of it on the website, so it's easier for people to post and employers to post, but I'm still the one approving the jobs. Some during the day when I get a break here and there, but mostly at night for a couple hours. I have to put the kids to bed. And my wife, her job's increasingly busy, so it's more been a one-man show these days. But obviously keeping the nonpartisan, bipartisan tilt to it. And, the fun part for me is, posting the jobs, but the value that I love is that when I hear of great stories of people getting their first job or internship or finding a job on our site and helping advance their career. And then the biggest value is really just, doing those one-on-one coffees. I'll never say no to a coffee. It might take me a couple of months to schedule, but I'll do a phone or a Zoom or a coffee with someone to kind of help them talk through their situation to figure out what's next for them. And one of the biggest things that piece of advice that I've taken myself that I think I've passed along is that the next job you're going to get is not going to be your dream job. The next job you get is going to help you get your dream job in 2 to 5 years. And my example is a perfect one. Coming off of Capitol Hill and the DNC, I wanted to work for either an energy company or a tech company. And I had an offer from an energy company, in-house job that was great, paid more, better benefits, but I took a chance on a startup trade association, lower pay, less stable. But because someone had told me that I did want to work at one of those tech companies, whether that was Google or Facebook or Amazon at the time, and that thinking that if I did want to work for something like a Spotify, I didn't even know Spotify at the time, I would have to go to that trade association to get that experience. And I took that chance and did that. And I actually thought I was going to have to go into Google first or one of those bigger companies, but I skipped a step and then landed the Spotify job doing all U.S. government relations for Spotify for 6 years. And I never would have gotten that had I taken that more profitable and in-house energy job, because they never would even considered me. So when I talk to folks and trying to figure out their next step, so when even that next step is even senior out of college going their first internship, or someone mid-career or senior, what that next step is. That's the exciting part, is like talking through to people, like really figure out what their dream job is, what they value in a job. And those are some of the conversations that really bring value to this whole website stuff, that it's helping people find their path in their career that brings them joy of the work they do every day.
Well, you offered the same thing last time you were on about willing to meet with anyone. And I think it's such a great, it's so smart of you to do, and so incredibly gracious of you to do. And the fact that you're still offering it, because I know you're very, very busy, but I would encourage any of our listeners, if you're coming out of college or you're on Capitol Hill or trying to figure out what to do next, I would take Tom up on it. And if I was looking to make a career change, I would call Tom and ask him, because he really has a great perspective. And given what this job site that you run, that also gives you great perspective. I find it interesting that, so I see, so the employer will post the job and then you approve it. That makes it very efficient.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is a few folks have criticized, like, well, why do you charge the job seeker? Why don't you charge the employer? Well, the reason this thing was started and the reason it keeps going really is the Capitol Hill-based jobs and internships. And there is no budget for a Capitol Hill office to advertise their jobs, because they don't need to spend money. They get so many applicants, they just put it out there and they get some great applicants, right? And the private sector, they might have budget, but it's just the way it works is like, if they know we've cultivated a good group of 20,000 people that get that free daily email every morning of the types of people that want to work on Capitol Hill. It's either Capitol Hill wanting to hire them, or people out Capitol Hill wanting to hire those type of people that have that experience or want to work there. So it just works. And the way we're able to get the volume of postings really helps people that they're not sure where they want to go, or they want to work on a campaign and then go on back into the government, or they want to work on a campaign and then skip government, go right to the private sector or whatever. And it's that congruence of all that policy, politics, government type of professional that makes it a lot of fun. Yeah. And
I also, I love how you talked about the comparing the two jobs, the energy company versus the Internet Association, how you evaluated those two options. And also, coming off of the inaugural, working on the inauguration and wanting a job in the White House. And if you're working on the inauguration, you probably have a pretty good chance of getting a job in the administration, but because of the year and the timing, and you pivoted and, didn't waste any time and didn't sit there, oh, woe is me. And it was very smart the way that you pivoted and, jumped into the Internet Association and then, off to the races. It's a great lesson. Yeah, well, I'll say it wasn't easy. I had to, like I was telling I'm sure my 3-year-old at the time, Daddy's going to work, but I wasn't really going to work. I was going to network all day, every day. So I would line up like 2 or 3 different coffees. I'd line up a lunch with somebody, whether that was a mentor or someone whose brain I wanted to pick about my next job. And you just had to pound the pavement. You got to go get all this advice. And you can find an article that I posted on my website that I talk about this 11 networking tips for DC. But what it really is when you have those conversations, you have to do the work ahead of time to find out about that individual. So you're not just saying, so how did you get your start in DC? And so your conversation starts with, I saw you started here. This is the type of job that I want to eventually get to. Like, what would your advice be for me? And at the end of every one of those conversations, you're obviously very grateful for them sacrificing their time to give into you to help you find that job or internship. You send them a thank you email every single time with your resume attached, because you never know where that resume will be forwarded to. I've had so many people say, yeah, I got coffee with this person, and their chief of staff came up to us and said, I don't want to post it on Tom Manatos Jobs or anywhere else because I'll get a million resumes. Do you know anyone good? And they said, yeah, I just got coffee with this young woman, and the resume was forwarded, and I got an interview and I got the job. And like, that's just the way it works. So, but also at the end of every one of those conversations, you're going to say, thank you so much for your time. Is there someone else you suggest I reach out to? And that suggestion might be based off of a conversation you had, whether it's like you want to get into environmental policy or you're from Texas or wherever. And by attaching that resume in that thank you email, they can easily just forward it or send the resume along and say, hey, this person's great. Would you get coffee with them? And it brings some context. It saves that person time. And then if you really want to stand out, which no one does anymore, a handwritten thank you note is key. That's just really a way to stand out with them. But when you're meeting with all these people, you make a spreadsheet
and you do first name, last name, you do their email. If you find it, or if you get their cell, you use that, and you take notes from those conversations. So in those 4 months of job searching, what I was doing, and even though people made the crack a million times, well, I know a guy who runs a job website who could help you get a job, and that was me. I was kind of sick of that by the third time someone said it. But I relied on that spreadsheet. So when I applied to the Internet Association, I went back to my spreadsheet. I said, okay, who's going to know this new CEO of the Internet Association? Or when I applied to that energy job, I searched on LinkedIn to find all the different connections. And I went to my spreadsheet of all the people I've networked with, like who would know this person that could send my resume in and work that angle on my behalf. So it's about, when you're in a job search, I say a day feels like a week feels like a month feels like a year. It's just a painful process, but you got to have faith and you got to stay organized and keep pounding the pavement to, rack up those names in that spreadsheet that you can then rely upon. So that when I applied to the Internet Association, I looked on LinkedIn and found the CEO had been on the Hill the same time as me. And I set a goal. I'm like, in the next 10 days, I'm gonna have 10 different people reach out that we know in common to say that you need to hire this guy. Now I was blessed to have that many connections with this one person. But I was able to execute it. And I sat down for my final interview and he said, I've heard a lot about you from a lot of people. I said, ooh, hopefully not too many. He said, no, it's a good thing to hear good things when you're about to hire somebody. And that kind of stuck with me, that the more that you can have people weigh in on your behalf, even if it's just somebody you had coffee with or a friend of somebody you had coffee with, if you just put yourself in the shoes of the hiring manager and you're hearing good things about someone you're about to hire from people you trust, that almost guarantees that hire or makes it much more likely. And so that's what I did over those 4 months. I'm just pounding the pavement and putting the work in.
And with that job with the Internet Association, and you were meeting with those 10 people, at the end of that meeting, would you ask them to weigh in with the person doing the hiring on your behalf?
Oh yeah. Yeah. And I had already strategically met with those folks that was asking. So I didn't have to have that conversation again. I shot them an email saying like, hey, our conversation a couple months ago was great. I really appreciated it. Actually, I just applied to this job, and always put the link to the job with your resume attached and say, I applied. I think I'd be great for it. I see that you're connected to this person. Would you mind sending my resume attached over them with a recommendation? And usually they know you're looking. They know you're in that hunt. It's like, oh yeah, I'll shoot a note. And I did do a Codel with him, or I was on the same committee as her, and they'll send your resume along. It can really help.
Do you remember when you began your job networking, looking for a job, how many people you met with, or how many people made it onto that spreadsheet?
I got to go look it up, but that's a good question. I was averaging about 3 coffees or meetings or lunches a day, and I was unemployed for 4 months. So it was,
oh my God, it was 3 a day.
Yeah. On average I would, but those are phone calls, and it was a different time. Pre-COVID, it's like, you could walk around Capitol Hill and have 3 of those really quickly. And now with like the hybrid, are you on the Hill? Are you at home? It's a lot harder these days to do this type of stuff and rack them up to the quantity that I did back then.
Well, it's also interesting what you said about the fact that you were thinking, I want to try to get 10 people to weigh in on my behalf. And even if you only got half that many, that's a very interesting approach. And a very smart one, because I think a lot of people would have thought, oh, I'll try to get one person to weigh in on my behalf and then stop there. That was that's a very interesting point that you made. And the other point that you made is, I think you're right. I think a lot of people, when they're networking, they kind of view it as they're out there backslapping and BSing and having coffees. And you're right. It's really, you got to keep track and you got to stay organized. And I don't think a lot of people do. I think you're right. I think that's the critical piece, so that you can follow up with them, and you can follow up 30 days later. You can refer back to your notes in the Excel spreadsheet. The 3 things you talked about, because you've had 100 meetings, but they've only had 1 or 2, so they're going to remember what they talked about. And they're going to remember you. And that's the second thing I like that you said. And the third thing was attaching a resume. I've heard so many people say, well, my resume is not really ready and blah, blah, blah. I'm thinking, well, first of all, most people are just glancing at it. And just as you said, it's something they can forward on, so they don't have to explain it. They don't have to have your email. They just take Tom Manatos' resume and they forward it on to John Smith and say, this guy's looking for a job. I think he'd be qualified. Give him a call.
Yeah, and that's the difference between like even just doing a hyperlink to someone's LinkedIn. Like you made the point, you don't have that person's cell phone and email on there. Where a resume is like your one-stop shop for all the contact information, all the way they want to represent themselves to a future employer. It's vital. It's key. The other thing I would just say is that, some of the best people naturally network all the time in category and keep note of who they've networked, even in their day jobs, even when they're not looking for a job. So I wish I knew all the people that I work with every day and I had a spreadsheet that if an opportunity came up tomorrow, I could then pivot to that spreadsheet. Now, I have different spreadsheets that I use for work of like all the people at the different companies like mine or my former job at Spotify, I have all the music streaming service points of contact and all the people on the Hill I used to lobby. I have those to like rely upon. But some of the best people are able to, in their day jobs, network so that when they're searching for that job, they already have that kind of spreadsheet already from their previous jobs that they can rely upon to network, and then they build upon that when they're doing that job search, if that makes sense. So it's being a master at being organized and knowing the people that you know that could help you get those jobs. And I should say also, it's not all about doing what's best for you. And this sounds so strange to say, and I still like kind of struggle with it. When you ask someone to do you a favor, that actually brings you closer to that individual. So that individual will even feel more likely to ask you a favor. And it's not about doing favors for each other. It's just having that relationship. And that's what this world is about. It's like, oh yeah, you help me on this, or you help me educate, or you help open the door for this person or this individual, this issue. And that's what this is all about. I mean, my relationships with folks now go back 20 years or 25 years of just doing something in politics together. And that I've relied on that a whole host of different reasons. I mean, I was emailing a friend from the Gore campaign that we sat across the desk from each other now 22 years ago, because she's at the State Department and I needed some intel on something. And she's like, oh yeah, here it is. And I hadn't talked to her in months or years. And it's just those things where, and I've helped her in the past, those relationships matter. And even as strange as it sounds, even just simply networking with somebody, when you get that job and that individual that helped you get that job, or even just did coffee with you, notices that you're there and they need, something answered for them, and you're in that office, they're going to ping you and you're going to help them. And that's a mutually beneficial relationship. So it's just the way this world works, and you're not putting people out. You're not annoying them too much to ask them for these initial coffees or ask them to help you with that job search, because it's going to come back around. It's a very good way to pay it forward in both directions.
Well, it's great advice. And I think, and I think you're one of the reasons I think you're probably very successful in Washington is that you have the feeling when you're talking to you that you are an open book, and that you're getting exactly, there's no, everyone criticizes politics, but there's like no hidden agenda. It's like, here it is. And you're pretty straightforward, and you have, you can tell you have great empathy for people and you want to help. And I love talking to you about what's going on in Capitol Hill and career, because I think you give great career advice. And I think the service that you and Dana provide, this job listing, the job site, is just fantastic. So anyways, it's always great to get tips from you. And Tom, we very much appreciate the time.
Well, thanks for the time. And if anyone's interested in chatting again, it might take me a few months to schedule it, but it's just my first initial last name at gmail.com, just tmanatos@gmail.com to do any networking. And then our website's tommanatosjobs.com. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we'll have your email, the job site, and the link to the 11 things that you need to do when you're networking. And for our listeners out there, remember you can follow us on Twitter, a former Jack Dorsey company, and Facebook and Instagram. And you can sign up for our email at politicallife.net. And we hope you are all doing well, and we will see you next week.